My concern about China when it comes to nuclear doesn't have to do with the environment. It has to do with the fact that it is making alliances with our allies to build nuclear power plants. So this is obviously a problem because the truth about nuclear is that it's a dual use technology. You can use it to make electricity in the most environmentally sustainable way possible, but you can also use the materials to make weapons. And so for that reason, the United States has always made it a priority to work with our allies to build nuclear power plants so that we can be on the ground and be their partners. Well, the United States has allowed China to work with Saudi Arabia, which is a country which I think a lot of us have concerns in terms of its human rights record on, but nonetheless has been the way that the United States has balanced Iran in the Middle East. And so by letting China work with Saudi Arabia to enrich uranium and build nuclear power plants, the United States is undermining our national security interests in a region that we know is extremely volatile, extremely important, particularly now that Afghanistan has fallen into the hands of the Taliban. So my concern is that because of our obsession, our romantic love of renewables in the United States, particularly among progressives, and the fear of nuclear, that we've actually been both falling down on terms of what we need to be doing environmentally with nuclear, and we've also been giving up a national security advantage to our biggest geopolitical rival in the form of China.
You mentioned that the waste of nuclear power has never hurt anybody. I believe that's what you said. Is that actually the case? I mean, I think I can think of a number of examples where I think, it has caused harm to people.
Sure. So nuclear waste, what we're talking about in general is the fuel rods from civilian nuclear power plants. During World War II, when they were making nuclear weapons, there was a lot of messes. Nuclear weapons are a totally different animal. So you've had cleanups of nuclear weapons production in Hanford, Washington, in other parts of the United States around the world, but that's not nuclear power. That's not what we refer to as nuclear waste for the most part. And then in terms of the accidents that we've had, it's not related to the waste. It was just related to the operation of the nuclear power plants. So the handling of nuclear waste from nuclear power plants has really been amazing, and it should be, because it's just the solid fuel rods that have been done being fissioned, where the atoms had been split to give off heat to create the power. They're safely stored on site usually, or moved to a facility. They've never hurt anybody. I don't know how else to say it. They could fall over and crush somebody because they're very big and heavy, but that's not even happened as far as I know. The reason nuclear is the safest way to make electricity, according to every major scientific study, is because it doesn't produce air or water pollution. The only byproduct are those fuel rods and a modest amount of low-level waste, which nobody cares about, nobody worries about, because it's the same kind of waste we get from hospitals and other places that have radiological materials. So the reason nuclear is so good for the environment is because of energy density. It produces such an intense amount of energy. This amount of uranium can provide me with all the energy I need for my entire high energy life, as opposed to many, many train cars of coal, many gallons of petroleum or the equivalent of gasoline or of natural gas. So that's what's so special about nuclear. It's obviously also the thing that makes it such a potent weapon is its concentrated form. But from an environmental point of view, what you want is to concentrate your energy and other forms of production, because that's how you reduce the impacts on the natural world.
I'm going to harp on this a little bit more because in Japan, right, we had the most recent nuclear power accident, right? And I actually think that the fallout, again, to use, I guess, a poor pun here, of that was, I think, a lot of people being less interested in building nuclear. I think there's a correlation there.
Oh, well, for sure, you're right. The 2011 accident in Fukushima, Japan, was scary for people, and it was a big industrial accident. We also know that not enough radiation emitted from that accident to cause cancer, to hurt anybody. Don't take my word for it. You can read the reports on it. I've written extensively on it. I've been to Fukushima twice. I've interviewed all the top scientists. I've read all the main reviewed the literature for my book. It's It's the kind of accident you would expect from a technology that is still being developed. Nuclear, people think it's been around for a long time because we don't have very good historical memory, but we've been using coal for 400 years. We've been using oil and gas for over 150 years. Nuclear is very young technology. It's only been around for really 50, 60 years. So you would expect to have some amount of accidents. But you've got to remember that when, Deepwater Horizon, an offshore oil platform, explodes, people die. When natural gas pipelines explode, people die. So what other accident could you have where nobody dies, nobody gets sick, nobody has cancer? Same thing happened with 3 Mile Island in 1979 in the United States. Nobody was sickened or injured from any of the radiation. The worst nuclear accident, the worst nuclear power plant accident in history was Chernobyl. Fewer than 50 people died within the first few years of the accident, and the best available science suggests that only 200 people total over an 80-year period will end up dying from the thyroid cancer that they got. And you have to contrast that to the 6 million people who die prematurely every year from air pollution. One estimate, because nuclear doesn't produce air pollution, one estimate is that nuclear has actually saved 2 million lives simply by preventing the burning of fossil fuels and the air pollution that's associated with it.
And this is actually also pretty a fascinating, way to think about things because, the pollution, you're saying, is the real problem. It's not the increase in temperature.
It's not like you breathe some pollution and die right away, but we do think that 6 million lives a year are shortened, according to the World Health Organization, from breathing air pollution. Humans can survive warmer temperatures. I mean, we do so all over the world. If you've ever been to the Middle East, I went to Dubai one time, and I had to be indoors like the entire time. It was just too hot to be outside, and so there's just the safetyism, this painting of humans as fragile and vulnerable to everything that happens in the world is really a psychological disorder. It comes paradoxically from being so safe. We just don't have that much to worry about. I was just at our family reunion in Indiana. My mom grew up on a farm, and they described their childhood in the 1930s and 40s, and it was like people were dying. They got the measles, they got the mumps, people had fingers and hands cut off, babies died. I mean, it was like mayhem. And I was like, but did you have a happy childhood? Oh yeah, we had a great childhood. And now everybody's unhappy, even though nobody ever gets hurt or harmed or gets their fingers cut off or gets the measles or mumps. I mean, I think we should take strong action on pandemics like we have with coronavirus, but just look at the exaggeration to so much of it. And I think that's the safetyism, that's the kind of paranoia or neuroticism that we see as one of the byproducts of having been so safe and so successful at protecting our children and ourselves.
When we spoke in the past, we've discussed in this sort of ideological interest in renewable energy, which you take serious issue with. You argue basically that renewables are actually the problem, not the solution.
Well, that's right. So renewables, which refer to solar panels, industrial wind turbines, burning of wood, they require more of the natural world. They require more land, about 300 times more land to produce the same amount of electricity from a solar farm or from an industrial wind farm as from a natural gas or nuclear plant. They have very large impacts on wildlife. Last week, a lawsuit was filed to stop the construction of industrial wind farms off the coast of the East Coast, because they would threaten the existence of the most endangered whale species in the world, which is the North Atlantic right whale. It's critically endangered. There's only 400 of them left. There's fewer than 200 breeding females. The science is very strong, showing that anything that could hurt or harm or kill a right whale could imperil the entire species. It could go extinct. It's the most endangered whale species, and here they are. They want to build these gigantic industrial wind farms off the East Coast with boats that could kill the whales, with the special wiring and cabling that could endanger the whale species. Similarly, in California, we saw that Dozens of endangered desert tortoises were killed after they were relocated from a big solar farm, in Nevada, actually, in the Mojave, Nevada. Big article in the Las Vegas paper. And now we're seeing that in California, the governor, who may very well be recalled next month, has been trying to shut down our last nuclear power plant, even though it has become habitat. I'm not kidding you, for sea lions, seals. When you visit the nuclear power plant, Diablo Canyon on the central coast of California, you can see all these animals clustered around the plant because it's clean, fresh water. It's slightly warmer water. Well, the governor wants to shut down that nuclear power plant, which provides electricity for 3 million people, even though we're at risk of blackouts for 2.5 million people. The governor has just announced emergency orders to allow the burning of diesel fuel, which is our dirtiest fuel. So one of the issues in the recall now is this issue of energy. We've seen all of the opponents of the governor advocating continuing to operate Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, and the governor really in a kind of ideology of harmonizing with the natural world and a kind of fear of nuclear, continuing to try to shut down the plant.
Michael, you say that a lot of these folks are into, basically bringing things back to nature, and that, let's say, offshore wind farms are a way to get there. Why is it that they're insensitive to the reality of, the right whale, for example? How does that work?
Yeah, it seems paradoxical for people who say they care so much about the natural world to promote energy sources, whether it's a big solar farm in Nevada or a big industrial wind farm off the coast of the East Coast, that directly kill endangered and threatened species. It seems paradoxical, but I think it's important to remember that the people that are advocating those projects are deeply ideological. They're very disconnected from the natural world. I see this all over the place. It's very striking to me that the people, for example, that don't live in California, that don't hike, in fact, people who sometimes admit that they don't hike or camp, are the people who absolutely freak out when there's a forest fire. And we have to remind them that fires are a natural part of forest ecosystems. Most forests require some amount of fire for seeds to regenerate, for the soil to regenerate. Now, we don't want the high intensity fires, we want the lower intensity fires. But journalists, for the most part, don't differentiate between those two things. I think what explains a lot of it, Jan, is that the people who are journalists, who work in the media, the elite who live in places like New York or Washington, D.C., but even in places like Berkeley or Boulder, Colorado, these are people who have very little connection to the productive sectors of the economy. Their parents and grandparents lived and worked in cities. These are people that rarely are in nature. They are attracted to the idea of nature, but they don't actually spend much time in nature or working with nature. They don't understand how to manage a forest. They don't understand that desert landscapes are full of life and are full of species. They don't understand that the fishermen of the Atlantic coast make great efforts to not harm whales. They have very sophisticated processes to avoid harming whales, and that you can't just go and build big industrial projects in places of critical habitat without killing endangered species. The life of progressive people tends to be very removed from physical realities, whether farming, fishing, hunting, manufacturing, trucking, just the kind of basic physical function of societies. And it's only getting worse. I mean, affluent people basically have all of their food and products delivered to them. It used to be that people thought that food came from supermarkets. They didn't know that it came from farms. Now we think it comes from an Amazon delivery truck. So there's a disconnection there. But the other is just ideology. Basically, people spend so much time online. People spend so much time in media that they become ideological. And so their idea of nature is very different from what nature actually is.